Welcome. Today, we dive into a story shaped by time, mystery, and forgotten legends. Let's begin. The desert night stretched wide across the ancient horizon, its cool breath drifting between the dunes like a whisper from forgotten centuries. Egypt was changing. Not in the loud, violent way kingdoms often shift, but in a quiet, patient rhythm, like the slow pulse of the Nile in the moonlight. What had once been simple tombs carved into rock had evolved into a new kind of sacred architecture. The people of Egypt no longer thought of death as an ending, but as a long journey requiring preparation, guidance, and knowledge, hidden deep beneath sand and stone. The land rested in a calm harmony. The Nile, steady and predictable, continued its sacred cycle: flood, retreat, renewal. Villages thrived near its banks, where fishermen cast nets at sunrise and farmers shaped the soil with practiced hands. The air felt full of promise, soft, silent, ancient. And as life blossomed in the world above, another world grew in the shadows below. A world of inscriptions, rituals, and secrets meant not for the living, but for the soul after death. It was in this quiet age that Egypt began crafting something even more mysterious than pyramids: the sacred texts that would guide a soul beyond the veil. Their earliest forms were simple: spells painted onto coffin walls with dark pigments made from crushed minerals, lines of protective words, gentle like prayers, firm like commands. Priests believed these writings were alive, breathing, watching, waiting to be used when the moment of death arrived. The desert heard these whispers. The gods, it seemed, approved. Over time, the texts grew longer, more complex. What started as individual spells slowly formed a woven tapestry of knowledge. Words that spoke of gates and guardians, of hidden passages and divine trials. And these texts, these ancient instructions for the afterlife, would one day become known as the Book of the Dead. But in this era, they were still young, still forming, still searching for their true shape. And as Egypt learned more about the world of spirits, ordinary people learned too. Craftsmen carved symbols they did not fully understand, but deeply respected. Families whispered sacred words over their loved ones. Priests trained for years to memorize rituals meant to protect the fragile spirit after its final breath. Egypt was no longer just a land of living kings. It was becoming a land of eternal souls. And somewhere in the vast silence of the desert night, beneath tombs and chambers carved into limestone cliffs, the groundwork was being prepared for the greatest spiritual text of the ancient world. A guide that would one day help the dead walk through darkness with courage and certainty. This was the dawn of a new age, an age where death itself was studied, mapped, understood, and Egypt was only beginning to tell its story. The moon drifted slowly across the desert sky, its pale glow spilling over temple roofs and the quiet waters of the Nile. Egypt slept softly, but its temples did not. Within their stone corridors, beneath carved pillars and painted ceilings, a different kind of life stirred: quiet, disciplined, ancient. This was the life of the priests, the guardians of sacred knowledge, the keepers of shadows and light. While farmers rose with the sun and builders shaped the desert by day, the priests lived according to another rhythm. Their world was filled with incense smoke, silent gestures, and words spoken not to men, but to gods. Every movement of their hands, every line of script they painted, carried meaning that stretched beyond the living world. And it was here, in the dim inner chambers of these temples, that the earliest maps of the afterlife were formed. Priests believed that the soul did not wander blindly after death. It traveled through a complex landscape, a series of gates, rivers, guardians, and trials that tested its purity and strength. These beliefs were not written overnight. They grew slowly, like the Nile building a new layer of fertile soil each year. Every generation of priests added something new, a symbol, a spell, a story passed down in whispers during moonlit ceremonies. At night, when the desert wind pressed softly against the temple walls, the priests lit small lamps of oil. Their golden flames flickered like the heartbeat of the gods. Through these rituals, the priests trained themselves to walk between two worlds, the seen and the unseen. They studied the stars, believing the heavens revealed pathways of the dead. They observed the cycles of the moon and sun, understanding them as signs of rebirth. They memorized long lines of ancient verses, their voices echoing in stone chambers like ripples on water. It was said that a skilled priest could open the mouth of a statue, allowing a god to speak through stone. Others could purify a body so completely that it became a perfect vessel for eternal life. To them, death was not a sorrowful ending. It was a transformation, a continuation of the soul's long journey. And these beliefs shaped everything: the architecture of tombs, the placement of treasures, the designs of amulets, even the colors painted onto walls. Blue for the heavens, green for rebirth, gold for the flesh of gods, red for protection. Every detail had meaning, coded into symbols that only trained minds could interpret fully. Yet beyond symbolism and ritual, the priests held something far more powerful: the responsibility to guide the king's soul. When a pharaoh died, the world seemed to pause. The river carried its waters slower. The desert winds whispered with unusual stillness. In that moment, the priests became the bridge between mortal life and the eternal realm. They performed long ceremonies, washing the body, anointing it with sacred oils, wrapping it with linen inscribed with protective words. They whispered spells into the layers of cloth. They placed amulets over the heart, the throat, the hands. They spoke ancient names of gods older than memory. All of this was preparation for a journey no living person would ever take, but every soul would. The priests believed that if even one part of the ritual was incorrect, the soul could become lost, trapped in darkness, or forgotten among silent sands. That fear pushed them toward mastery, precision, devotion. As centuries passed, these rituals grew more sophisticated. What had once been simple prayers and small inscriptions evolved into entire books, scrolls filled with knowledge that only priests could read. They documented the geography of the afterlife: lakes of fire, fields of reeds, celestial boats carried by the sun god, and shadow creatures lurking in hidden corridors of the underworld. Slowly, gently, Egypt began to understand death not as an unknown darkness, but as a structured path, one that could be navigated with the right guidance. And so, manuscripts were written. Tombs were decorated with detailed maps of the spiritual world. Amulets were shaped like scarabs and eyes to protect the dead. Statues were carved to act as eternal servants. Entire rooms were built underground, filled with objects the soul might need on its journey. Jars of food, clothing, furniture, even board games to pass the hours between worlds. Above ground, life continued with the steady heartbeat of the Nile. Below ground, eternity took form in silence. Egypt had become a civilization where the living and the dead coexisted in harmony, each relying on the other, each shaping the other. each giving meaning to the other's world. And in this balance, in this fragile perfection of life and death, the foundation was being laid for a moment in history when a pharaoh named Khufu would attempt something so immense, so precise, so eternal, that even time itself would bow before it. But for now, in the lamplit chambers of priests and the soft breathing of the desert night, the story of Egypt continued to grow, layer by layer, word by word, like a pyramid rising not from stone, but from belief. The sun rose slowly over the desert, casting long golden beams across the ancient sands. The light moved with the gentle patience of a god, sliding over quiet villages, the slow-moving river, and the distant silhouettes of temples that guarded the land. Egypt had entered a time of balance, a moment when the world seemed perfectly arranged between heaven and earth. But balance, the priests often said, was never meant to last forever. It was only meant to prepare, and Egypt was being prepared. The knowledge of centuries, rituals, prayers, architecture, astronomy, had woven itself into the very fabric of society. What began as simple tombs and humble offerings had transformed into a vast spiritual system that touched every part of daily life. The people worked not only for themselves, but for the gods, for the king, and for the eternal world that awaited them. The land was ready for a new kind of greatness. Families awoke each morning to the bright shimmer of the Nile. Children learned to read the water levels by watching the sacred Nilometer. Fishermen cast nets, their boats gliding like shadows across the river's surface. Artisans carved statues with faces so calm they seemed to breathe. Farmers bent to the soil they trusted more than anything in the world. And high above them all, in the towering temples, priests continued their endless prayers, keeping the harmony between worlds unbroken. Egypt was steady, confident, unified. But beneath this calm surface, something extraordinary was forming. An idea so large, so daring, that it could only belong to a king with dreams greater than the desert itself. In the royal palace, a quiet transformation was taking place. A child, born during this era of peace and ambition, was growing into a man shaped by the lessons of those before him. He listened to the stories of Sneferu's pyramids, learned the secrets of quarry masters, studied the rituals of the priests, and walked the sacred paths along the riverbanks where gods were said to travel at dusk. His name was Khufu. To the world, he was a young prince. To destiny, he was something much greater. Egypt had built pyramids before him, experimental shapes, bold attempts, magnificent starts. But Khufu saw them not as monuments, but as beginnings. He believed Egypt was no longer practicing, no longer learning, no longer struggling to understand stone or God or eternity. He believed Egypt was ready to transcend. For years before his reign truly began, whispers filled the palace corridors, whispers of a project unlike any seen before, whispers of a structure so perfect that the desert winds would bow, so massive that the sky itself would seem to rest upon its peak. Priests studied ancient texts, searching for divine approval. Architects traveled to Dashur to examine Sneferu's stones. Surveyors analyzed the stars, mapping the heavens with mathematical precision that felt almost supernatural. The land itself seemed to sense what was coming. Quarries stirred with new life. Workers sharpened copper tools. Boats lined the Nile, ready to carry stones that weighed more than 10 men. Entire villages were constructed to house the laborers. Bakers prepared endless amounts of bread and beer. Healers stocked herbs. Priests blessed the ground. And in the palace, Khufu watched, silent and determined, as the first sketches of his great dream took shape. But this dream was not just stone. It was philosophy. Khufu believed that a king's tomb should not simply honor his life. It should represent the divine order of the universe. Every angle, every chamber, every cubit of the structure would mirror the harmony between the earth and the sky, between mortality and eternity. It would be a monument to Ma'at, the sacred balance of all things. Egypt was no longer building a tomb. It was building a message written not in ink but in stone. As months passed into years, preparations deepened. The priests studied celestial patterns to determine the pyramid's orientation. Architects designed corridors that aligned with specific stars. Workers trained to move blocks with methods that would astonish the world thousands of years later. Sculptors crafted statues meant to serve the king's spirit forever. Egypt had become a single body working toward a single heartbeat. The desert itself shifted in tone. A soft hum seemed to linger in the air at sunrise, as though the sands were awakening, waiting for something monumental. Travelers passing by Dashur and Medum told stories of seeing unusual lights in the sky, or hearing distant echoes that sounded like chanting. The land was preparing for a transformation that would redefine history. And soon, the first stone would be placed. But before that moment, before the world changed, Egypt paused, just for a breath. A quiet breath, held between past and future. A breath that felt like the entire civilization preparing to step into immortality. The river flowed peacefully. The temples glowed with candlelight. Stars shimmered above, ancient and patient. Egypt stood at the threshold of a new era, where all the knowledge of its priests, all the labor of its people, all the wisdom of its kings, would merge into a single creation. A creation that would defy time itself. A creation known as the Great Pyramid. And although the story of its construction belongs to another chapter, another night, the world in this moment was ready. The gods were watching. The desert was listening. And Egypt, for the first time in its long and patient history, was prepared to dream in stone. The moment the door clicked shut, an eerie silence filled the room. It was as if the entire house was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The faint hum from the recording on the phone persisted, but now it was only a whisper. A soft, irregular noise, like someone breathing slowly and deliberately right beside it. He couldn't bring himself to look at the phone, unwilling to see what might appear. The sound grew deeper, heavier, closer, as if someone was standing just behind him. Then, a faint crash came from the kitchen. Glass breaking, followed by silence. He stepped slowly toward the door, each footfall echoing in the empty hallway, but the sound of steps mirrored his own, yet was not human. Unearthly, uneven, almost deliberate. He rushed back to the bedroom, slamming the door and locking it. But even from the safety of the latch, he could feel it. Something waiting on the other side. The air grew colder, his breath forming misty clouds in the dim light. And the phone's recording was still running. Then a whisper emerged through it, quiet, nearly indistinct, yet unmistakably human. "Why did you open the door?" His heart pounded. The most terrifying part, the whisper was not in the room. It came directly from the phone itself, as if something unseen was speaking through it. From behind the door, a scratching sound appeared. Slow, deliberate, as if nails dragged along the wood. Then it stopped. He knew he shouldn't open the door, yet an inexplicable pull drew him toward it, as if a familiar voice was calling him. Calm, yet insistent. Come, I want to show you something. The cold in the room intensified. It was not the wind through the window, but something unnatural. In the corner of the ceiling, a shadow shifted. He held his gaze, unblinking, and the shadow grew, forming a shape. Someone, or something, was there, standing, watching him. The story did not end there. That night's recording, which had captured every detail, vanished from the phone by morning. It was as if it had never existed. Yet, on the door above, 3 deep scratches remained.